people who wouldn't have otherwise been in the political process are getting involved. We're seeing more endorsements from people like, Megan Thee Stallion and Katy Perry and Beyonce and Charlie XCX. And that brings people into the political process who wouldn't have otherwise voted. And that's only going to continue to grow in strength as we see more and more people come out and hopefully see this long anticipated Taylor Swift endorsement as well. But it's going to have a big impact.
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. I'm pumped to be here with the first-timer, Brian Tyler Cohen. He's a progressive YouTuber. He's the author of the brand new book, Shameless: Republicans' Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy. What's going on, my brother?
Tim, really happy to be here. Our series, obviously, Inside the Right, has been really fun for me, so excited to let you get in the driver's seat here.
Yeah, man, we're taking turns here. I get to turn the tables on you. And for folks who don't know Brian, here's the thing: if you just consume traditional, boring Axios and Politico media, for starters, you might see things like the Politico story on Monday talking about how Kamala Harris's campaign is in the tank because of the stock market, which has recovered all of its stock market losses since Monday. So, sometimes the legacy media doesn't treat you that well. But you might not know Brian, but many more people know Brian than know the people writing that Politico story. Your success in alternative media is just unbelievable. And I admire kind of the up from the bootstraps element to it. And so kind of before we get into the news of the day and the book, I kind of hoped you might give people a little bit of your origin story.
Yeah, so actually, I got interested in politics, I guess, around 2017, 2018 to start working in it. I moved to LA to act, basically, and I worked at my first job.
How'd that turn out?
It was great. I'm a huge star.
What's your IMDb look like?
Yeah, not great. But while I was in LA, I started writing articles to submit voluntarily for HuffPost, and I was just really passionate about that. And also being in the entertainment industry, where you have to wait for everybody to give you permission to do everything, and you have to wait for 10 different people to say yes before you can take one step forward. Getting into the political media space where I would be able to work for myself and kind of create content for myself was really freeing. And so there came a point where I started creating content while I was, working in LA, and I realized that I could, that my audience was growing pretty quickly, and so eventually just stopped the whole acting thing and went full time for politics. But just kept my head down. Good thing you were blogging for HuffPost and not working at a hipster restaurant like everybody, like these other failed actors. The lure was strong. The magnetic force when you're in LA to get to start waiting tables and being a bartender was strong. But avoided that and just kept my head down. Started making content on Facebook. That was the main frontier in political media back then, in 2018. And putting some of my content on YouTube as well. But just doing it consistently, keeping my head down, working, and cut to a few years later. Here we are.
People out there that just have political media dreams that are kind of outside going to journalism school. Anyway, I'll give you BTC's email if you want to do that. He's a good role model for it. All right, let's do the news. As you mentioned, we've been doing this Inside the Right series where you ask me about what the hell's going on in the brains of people on the right. And so it's your turn to have to answer that question. Nikki Haley was on with Bret Baier last night, and I want to play a 17-second clip that honestly, you could do an entire political science and psychology seminar on just this 17 seconds from Nikki Haley. Let's listen.
I want this campaign to win, but the campaign is not going to win talking about crowd sizes. It's not going to win talking about what race Kamala Harris is. It's not going to win talking about whether she's dumb. You can't win on those things. The American people are smart. Treat them like they're smart.
Are you smart? I guess. Is Nikki Haley smart? I guess is my question for you, Brian. What's happening there?
She says these things about Donald Trump, for Donald Trump, as if she doesn't know who he is. I mean, the reason that she was against Donald Trump for so long during the primary process is precisely because she knows that Donald Trump only does that. So to then turn around and pretend that he should be that he should be deferring to policy as if he would ever defer to policy kind of undermines Nikki Haley's whole knowledge of who the guy is and why she was running against him in the first place. There's this cognitive dissonance here with her where she knows Donald Trump and yet has this weird expectation of him to be somebody who he's not. And I'm not really sure what she's trying to do in the Republican Party at this point. I mean, she's effectively a persona non grata. It's not like there's a base within the GOP for her, but I guess she's trying to preserve some really, really narrow lane for some untold point in the future when the spell of MAGA breaks and somehow 80% of the Republican base isn't exactly who they are today.
Yeah, I think she's trying to convince people that she's smart, I think is what's happening. And that like, if they'd only listen to her, then things would be going better. And as a result, they should turn their lonely eyes to her next time. Like, I think that's what the game is here, why she's playing pundit, because it's like, you just notice she goes through this ticks of things, and she's been doing this for years, and all of these guys do this, but like this tick of things like, you shouldn't call Kamala Harris dumb. You shouldn't insult her race. You shouldn't, complain about crowd size. And rather than saying like, these things are bad, like on the merits, like we shouldn't, like we Fox viewers, like those of us here should not condone this. This is bad. Well, we should expect more of our president. It's like, there are these other people out there that don't condone it. Like if it worked, it would be fine, right? If
it's not that she doesn't agree with it. It's that she recognizes that it might not be a viable political strategy.
Yeah, it's a bizarre thing, that Nikki Haley. Good news is I don't think Donald Trump's going to be listening to her. Another big kind of news item yesterday is Tim Walz gave his first solo speech outing. That I thought was interesting on a couple of levels. He went to speak to AFSCME, a union where he talked a lot about economic populist issues and contrasted with the Trump Vance team and how they're kind of phony on that front. And he also pushed back on the stolen valor attacks. I'm curious, your book talks a lot about how to kind of combat the right wing, misinformation and lies and attacks. And so I'm interested to hear what you think about how Tim Walz did in dealing with the stolen valor attacks. Let's take a listen.
Then in 2005, I felt the call of duty again, this time of being service to my country in the halls of Congress. My students inspired me to run for that office, and I was proud to make it to Washington. I was a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee and a champion of our men and women in uniform. I'm going to say it again as clearly as I can. I am damn proud of my service to this country. And I firmly believe you should never denigrate another person's service record. To anyone brave enough to put on that uniform for our great country, including my opponent, I just have a few simple words. Thank you for your service and sacrifice.
What'd you think?
I mean, you can't get much better than that. I do talk in the book how Republicans rely on their historical branding, and one of the pieces of branding that they've leaned on for so long is that they're the party of the military. But so much of what we've heard from people on the left, whether it's Tim Walz here, whether it's Pete Buttigieg, whether it's Lucas Kuntz, who's being attacked for his, for being a Democrat as well. Everybody says the exact same thing, which is that the last thing that an actual good standing member of the military, somebody that has respect for the military, would do is to denigrate somebody for their own service. And so I think this is just one instance where J.D. Vance thinks that just by virtue of being a Republican, that he is entitled to like ownership over that label of like being pro-military. But everything he does actually undermines our trust in who he is and his ability to actually persuade us of that. And so I think that's his failing there. And good on these Democrats, whether it's Pete, whether it's Tim, whether it's Lucas, to push back on these guys by calling them out. And I think they're doing it really effectively and kind of disabusing Americans of this idea that Republicans somehow have ownership over the military stuff, which is to say nothing of the other labels that they benefit from.
Yeah, I do think that aura is definitely is what kind of gives Republicans a feeling that they can make these attacks without without feeling like there's going to be a boomerang effect on them. A couple interesting items in the Bulwark this morning. I just want to point out to people, Will Selber, who served his fucking ass off, by the way. We appreciate you, Will Selber, wrote kind of 6 things to know about the stolen valor claims. It's interesting to see Will, as a veteran, kind of break this down in a very sober way. If you're interested in that, we'll put it in the show notes. And the other thing that we had this morning is we interviewed a couple of John Kerry vets who were campaign strategists that dealt with the Swift voting attacks that came from Chris LaCivita, who's Trump's top advisor back then in 2004. I was interested in kind of reading through their advice. The one element of the wall of what they suggested that was not included in that Walz response was punching Trump over bone spurs, over how these vets are suckers and losers. I don't know. Maybe that's not the venue for it right there, but you got to figure like that is like the offensive play here, right?
Well, there is some like cognitive dissonance here. And going back to, we spoke about Nikki Haley. There is some cognitive dissonance here where they will bolster these attacks that are being posed by JD Vance against Tim Walz, but at the same time not recognizing or not accepting the fact that the guy at the top of the ticket, the standard bearer in the Republican Party, to your exact point, avoided military service by going to some random podiatrist somewhere and getting a note that says that he has a non-existent disease. So, it's they will always create a permission structure for themselves to get away with the exact thing that they're guilty of doing.
Yeah, the Walz thing, I'm curious your take. Some of our more progressive listeners maybe haven't been thrilled with my lukewarm Walz vibes. So what's your opinion been about the addition of Tim Walz to the ticket? Do you feel like he's added a lot? What have you thought about his performance?
I do. I mean, look, I think the optics, first of all, of him serving as, a compliment to Kamala Harris's San Francisco liberal. She's a black woman. Tim Walz is a white guy. He grew up as a farmer, Midwestern, rural, coach, football coach, teacher, union guy. And so I think just unto itself, just him being there is going to serve as a permission structure for people who may not feel inclined to support Kamala Harris just by virtue of her policies or even what she looks like. And as I said, commentary on the state of this country, that's all it takes for some people, but that's all it takes for some people. And I think a lot of, what I try to do is even if I can bring 1 or 2 more people into the process by virtue of what I say, then I think it's worth it. And so I think having someone like Tim Walz, who even if he brings a small amount of people into the political process over to the Democratic camp by virtue of who he is, then it's worth it. And so I think that has been one tack. The other is that he's been really effective in a different way from Kamala Harris. I think she's doing like the tough prosecutor versus felon thing. She's kind of meeting Trump at his level and proving his weakness by virtue of her strength. But Tim Walz brings something different where he has that very relatable, folksy, like coach attitude. And I think for different folks, that's going to be more persuasive if you're not into the like matching Donald Trump's tough guy vibe. You know what I'm saying? And so I think he does offer a good compliment to Kamala Harris.
It was funny watching him yesterday. If you watched the whole speech, he's still bad on the teleprompter, but kind of in a cute way. Like he would just lose his spot at the teleprompter for 8 seconds, try to figure out where he was, and then he goes back to talking like a normal person. In some ways, that's charming. He'll get better on it, but
that's the thing. Like
shows his authenticity. Kind of.
He doesn't even need it. He's great off teleprompter. I remember watching him. I think it was in Philadelphia for the first time, and I'm squinting at the screen. And I rely on teleprompter for my regular YouTube videos on a daily basis. That is a crutch for me. My videos are 1,000 words, so I need prompter anyway, but I've tried to get really good at making sure you can't tell that I'm reading prompter. But I was staring at Tim Walz and I'm like, I just don't think this guy is on prompter. I can't figure it out, but I'm not seeing him do the things that people who are on prompter do. The switching from left to right and looking at the panels to his credit, if he can do this extemporaneously, then more power to you.
Yeah. He was looking left to right yesterday, I'll tell you. And you just gave away a secret. Now our listeners know that you're on the prompter.
That's right.
One more thing. New poll out today from Cook Political and Global Strategy Group, legitimate polling outfits. Harris +3 in Michigan, +3 in Wisconsin, +2 in Arizona, +1 in Pennsylvania, +1 in North Carolina, which Nate Silver was flagging as maybe a sneaky comeback state for her. Tied in Georgia, down 3 in Nevada. Where are you on? Is there irrational exuberance at this point? Are you worried a little bit about about folks getting too high on their own supply, or what are you thinking about state of play?
Oh, I wouldn't be a Democrat if I wasn't worried about everything.
Okay.
That's our entrance fee into the Democratic Party. Look, I actually, knock on wood, I feel really good about the state of the race. I feel even better about the fact that the momentum is clearly only going in one direction. Even beyond that, I feel better about the fact that with every passing day, people who wouldn't have otherwise been in the political process are getting involved. We're seeing more endorsements from people who clearly are aligned with the Democratic agenda because they're endorsing now, but weren't endorsing expressly because Joe Biden was the nominee. So Kamala Harris is bringing something. We're seeing people like, Megan Thee Stallion and Katy Perry and Beyonce and Charlie XCX. And that brings people into the political process who wouldn't have otherwise voted. And that's only going to continue to grow in strength as we see more and more people come out and hopefully see this long anticipated Taylor Swift endorsement as well. But it's going to have a big impact. And we're seeing that further in the extent to which Kamala Harris's campaign is actually using the money that she's raising to open field offices, which will then help them in terms of bringing more people in, while Trump continues to, hawk his shoes and his NFTs and his trading cards and his Bibles and whatever else he's selling. And as far as I can tell, he hasn't opened up more than just a small handful of field offices, even in these swing states. And so I don't know what he's doing with the money. I am seeing Alina Habba with some really nice handbags, but other than that, I'm not sure really where the money is going.
He's been promising the most beautiful ads ever. They are running a lot of ads in Pennsylvania, Georgia. That's the thing the one thing that keeps me up at night when I look at those polls is that all he's got to do is win Pennsylvania and Georgia. Only down one in that one, tied in Georgia. So anyway, I think they're going to spend a lot of money there, but that's about it right now. All right, let's talk about the book. The subhead here is the Republicans' deliberate destruction. I talk about like what you see there and kind of in the book how you tried to frame that up, going from historically up to now.
Yeah, I think Republicans have a vested interest as the party of small government in going in there and purposefully breaking things so that they can point to the thing that they just broke as evidence that the government doesn't work. And then, of course, they'll turn around and say, so go ahead and elect the people who think that government should be shrunk down to nothing. And they present themselves as the saviors, again, to come in and fix the thing that is only broken because of them. The antidote to that, however, is that, we just look at what Democrats did with their first 2 years in office with effectively the same House margin as Republicans would have in the cycle before. And, when Republicans were in control, they passed a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires and installed 3 judges who would eventually overturn the right to safe and legal abortions in this country. Democrats with the same majority passed the American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act, the infrastructure law, the gun safety law, codified marriage equality into federal law, reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, added 16 million jobs, and brought the unemployment rate down to 4%. So that is the antidote to Republican dysfunction. That is a proof point that when you have people in government who want government to work, then it can work. And so that's what Republicans don't want you to see, basically. But that doesn't mean that they won't continue to go in there and break this stuff on purpose because they think that it can redound to their political benefit.
Yeah. So what about the kind of the messaging side of this? And I think you spend a lot of time in this world, thinking about how to offset it with what progressive or pro-democracy, however you want to put it, like media ecosystem that combats what's happening on the right. Like, what do you see that they are doing on the right when you're kind of really analyzing this from the book that is effective?
I think that they've been especially effective just honestly by virtue of how the thought leaders on the right have embraced alternative media and conferred a degree of legitimacy onto these people who deserve no legitimate. I mean, just straight, disinformation figures, people just peddlers, basically. But because the right has seen that mainstream media wasn't going to be an effective partner for them, and that they need some type of messaging apparatus, they immediately laid hands on all of these outlets on the right to a degree that Democrats were never willing or able to do on the left. And so we still kind of rely on mainstream media. I think most politicians on the left rely on mainstream media as kind of our messaging apparatus. I talk in the book about how Dan Pfeiffer actually says that it feels so bizarre for Democrats to spend all of this time crafting our message, the perfect message, saying exactly what we want to say, using the words we want to use, and then handing that perfectly crafted message over to legacy media to deliver it to people. And that's the wrong way to go about doing this, because mainstream media is not on the Democrats' side. They are not our messaging apparatus. But for so long, they've been viewed that way because Republicans have Fox News and Newsmax and OAN, who are avowed Republican propagandists. And so we just assume that the equivalent to that is going to be what we have on ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN. But that's not the case.
Can I tell you what my friends on the right would say to push back to that? They would say, well, sure, like the mainstream media might not be Fox equivalent, right? Like ABC might not be the equivalent of Fox, but they are biased towards the left. And it was hard for good faith conservatives to get a fair shake there. And, they do put their thumb on the scale. And so Fox was like a reaction to their failures.
Yeah, I think to a degree. I mean, I can understand where they're coming from, but the good comes with the bad. And also you see the extent to which those same networks, for as left-leaning as the journalists and the reporters might be, there's also the extent to which they will bend over backwards to do both sides journalism. And so, for example, knowing, with the lead up to the 2016 election, knowing that Hillary's emails was just basically being peddled on the right, that if they didn't cover it, they would be called the liberal media. And so they covered it ad nauseum. And we had something like 69 cover stories on the New York Times about Hillary's emails. And yet, when the same thing happened with Ivanka Trump during the Trump administration, came and went like a fart in a hurricane. And so there is that asymmetry at play here. And so I understand that the journalists and the reporters may be left wing, and I certainly believe that they are. But again, there is a gaming of the refs that we've seen the right take advantage of with regards to the mainstream media.
All right, so we are where we are. You talked in the book to Pete about why he goes into Fox. I played in the intro here, my little dabble, hanging out with our friend Tomi yesterday. I think that it's very important to go inside the bubble. What do you think? What did you learn talking to Pete and others about that? And what do you think Dems should do? There's some people on the left that say ignore them, don't platform them. There's some say Dems should go in there more. Like, should Dems be going on to these right-wing platforms? And if so, how should they be conducting themselves?
I completely changed my opinion on this, because at first I was like, don't platform them, don't legitimize these outlets. But I think we're fooling ourselves if we're gonna try to claim that Fox News is not legitimate, or is not viewed as legitimate, or is not a widely watched news network, or that we give them some huge benefit by platforming them. Fox News is watched by millions and millions of people. That ship has already sailed. So at this point, I think our option is to either cede that ground to Republicans, or if we have effective messengers like Pete, like Gavin Newsom during his debate with Ron DeSantis and Sean Hannity, send them into that area. I mean, what you did with Tomi Lahren is a perfect example of that. It is kind of like embarrassing them on their terrain, and it kind of helps to pop the bubble and not give them full, unfettered, complete control of these platforms where people don't see us. Because the only thing worse than going on and where we think that we're giving them some degree of legitimacy is giving them full control over those platforms, full access to their audience with zero pushback whatsoever.
All right, last one. I got to ask you a hard one. I wonder if you think about this at all. Because I totally agree with your criticism of the right media, and there's so much more there in the book that people should go and check out. It is corrupting. It is propaganda. They do advance fake narratives that give Republican politicians carte blanche to act like assholes. Do you worry that creating a backlash, a mirror, maybe not a mirror, but creating a separate ecosystem on the left to combat that ends up becoming corrupting in the same way?
I think that the onus is on us not to create an equivalent of Alex Jones's show. Creating an independent media.
I think we can create a higher bar for you than that. All right, you can maybe not just create an equivalent of Alex Jones. How about not create an equivalent of Hannity, or something like that.
I think the onus is on us not to do that. Look, creating an independent media infrastructure is not to say that we want to create the Fox News of the left. And I think the onus is on us to make sure that we don't create that we don't just become blue MAGA, that we don't just, basically become a cult of personality for those on the left. I think that's just going to be up to us, those of us who are independent media figures on the left in the pro-democracy ecosystem, to say that, like, to be discerning and to guide the conversation where we think it would be more appropriate to go. But there are going to be people who are going to do that, for sure. I have no doubt about that. It's just going to be about making sure that we can have some integrity in what we do, and some authenticity, by the way, in doing so. But
yeah, there wasn't a lot of authenticity on Tomi's show yesterday. It didn't seem like to me.
No, of course not. But and I can see that why. Look, I can see why she would benefit from this idea that it's going to be that to basically participate in the cult of personality that is Trump, and do this cognitive dissonance where she can both claim to be some champion for police rights while at the same time doing apologia for the guy who incited an insurrection against those very police. But I think what we have to do on the left is just have enough voices that are discerning enough, that have enough integrity, that you can both advocate for democratic values or pro-democracy values, depending on where you are on the spectrum, while also, not displaying the same cognitive dissonance that Tomi Lahren displays on her show. Right, that leads her to get embarrassed by you.
That's a bar I think you can step over. Brian Tyler Cohen, thank you for having me on your YouTube. I'm really impressed with what you've launched over there. The book, again, is Shameless: Republicans' Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy. Thanks again to failed actor, my friend Brian Tyler Cohen. Up next, Carol Leonnig.